Welcome back. Another Nozzlehead Notes podcast here for you today. Jared and Brady joining you. Wanting today up on tap, we have several topics. Of course, we'll have our local updates. We're going to talk briefly about some herbicide incorporation placement type issues and concerns. And then finally, our special guest today is going to be focusing on seed treatment. All this on the Nozzlehead Notes podcast. All right, Jared. Hey, good to see you again. Good week. We were talking earlier, kind of off screen, that we got a little bit of work done last week. So I think it's a great week, but I think we both agree there's still work to be done. So we're not done planning yet. It's kind of all over the board again. I'd still say some areas are 80, 90%, and some places are 50, 40, 50%.
Yeah, it varies widely. I would agree. It's been a busy week, a lot of questions, a lot of calls, and a lot of stuff got done. Still pretty good chunk of stuff to go. I mean, again, everybody's clicking away as best they can. In my area, we've had some spots of rain here, depending where you were at. Not tons and tons, again, depending on where you were at. Some got some good downpours with that heat and the pop-up storms, but a lot of stuff got done. And, we got enough rain in some areas to activate some of these chemistries that we got out. Probably the biggest news is these crops with the warm weather came out of the ground extremely fast. And so my one thing I'll continue to call out is make sure if you're going in a field that you may have a Verdict Sharpen Residual Pro in there, you make sure those crops aren't up yet, and we may need to swap those out if they are. So that's kind of the one thing that just making to emphasize. Any crops that are merged, those burners that are in that, we need to flop those out and go to something different.
Yeah, I noticed also, speaking of the fast emergence, and sometimes it's a case of that, came out of the ground pretty quickly. I saw some corn that was looking a little yellow yet, so it maybe got enough moisture to move the starter out of the way, but it's trying to find its other fertilizer. So we'll probably see a little bit of that here too, just when you get that fast emergence before the roots take hold from that. Yep. But good mixture of moisture field work last week in my territory, so definitely take it compared to where we were extremely dry. And so I think we're things are moving in the right direction. Maybe not getting the planting dates that we all wanted, but at the same time, I'll take it because we're getting crops in the ground and things continue to move forward.
Yeah, and I think that's going to lead us to one of the questions I've gotten here a lot early this week is we got fields that we're going to go plant here, and we're getting ready to do our burn downs or our residual products. Some of these may be a slight bit wet because of the rain we got down here. So there's the question of scratching it with a field cultivator, a vertical tillage tool, and then when to put that herbicide out. Do you do before or after that? That's always a common question I feel that we address.
Yeah, I think so too. And, I think there's several things we got to weigh out there. Real tempting to think, okay, if I'm doing tillage, I'm going to be aggressive with it and make sure I get all those weeds and everything else like that. That may not be the best thing for your herbicide program, right?
Yeah, and it depends. I mean, remember the vertical tillage tools, they're not always the best at tearing weeds out. So, if you're going in there, sometimes spraying before them and letting those weeds die back before you do that is a key element. If you're going to follow it afterwards, you may need to wait a little bit if you're trying to actually burn it down, because I've had a lot of misses sometimes with that, because it's not like a field cultivator, right? It's not running those shovels across that, turn all that ground down. I think, both of them have their advantages, right? They're both doing what most people are intending to do, which is dry up that planting zone in there. But again, it can sometimes make weed control more challenging.
Yeah, I think so. And of course, the watch out is that, you don't want to bury herbicide that you put out there, especially if you're trying to do residual and anything beyond just a burn down. And so, we always talk about a shallow surface mix if we're trying to incorporate a herbicide for activation purposes or something like that. Not all herbicides are labeled for pre-plant incorporation anyway. So we need to be kind of aware of what we're dealing with. And, some of our traditional chemistries, that used to be a lot more popular, the old prowls and different things like that. Less so, we've gotten away from that somewhat, but like you say, the planning goes on, we get some different practices in place and guys are trying to catch up on weeds. Maybe they don't want to wait 2 weeks for a burn down to completely be effective. So they may go in with a tillage operation. Again, like you said, it depends on your situation where you're going to put your herbicides up front or back, but you need to be aware of what you're doing. And my watch out always is don't bury the herbicide so deep, because you put it 6 inches deep with a disking and it's not going to do you any good because all those weeds are up above it. and just waiting to emerge. So
I think you bring up a great point, thinking about what weeds you're going after, right? I mean, I think in our area, some of the most problematic weeds are very shallow germinators, thinking of water hemp specifically, right? So, water hemp typically doesn't come from an inch below the soil surface. It's in the top half to quarter of an inch is where most of that's going to germinate. So the more herbicide we can leave on top, I feel we've had more consistency in our herbicides. Now, if we've got to go incorporate lightly with a field cultivator an inch or two deep, it's not always the end of the world, right? I mean, you're just diluting that chemistry if you're following the planter with that into those 1 or 2 inches that you're trying to scratch for that seed bed. So not always the end of the world, but again, just understand what we're trying to do is we're either, if you're not tilling, you're leaving that all on that surface to give the most protection as possible against emerging weeds, right? And then if you're incorporating in 1 to 2 inches, you're starting to dilute that a little bit, and it can be active, but sometimes that does shorten up some of the residual we have depending on the weather conditions.
Yep. No, I think you're spot on there. And I think, like I said, things are going to change as the time goes on, but I think we're getting to the point, hopefully progress kind of over the hump, and we'll start to see things click away here pretty quickly and get wrapped up sooner than later. I think probably let's move into our next topic and welcome our special guest. All right, joining us now, we have Nick Tinsley as our special guest for the week. And Nick is a BASF seed treatment field tech rep for us, and we're going to have him give us some insight here on a little bit of what we've been talking about here on the use of products like Olivo and other seed treatments, and give us his feeling. So Nick, definitely appreciate you taking the time out to join us today, and we're looking forward to visiting with you here for a few minutes.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be on the call here today, and where I sit, kind of central Illinois, there's not a lot of activity, so it gives me something to do. Come visit with you guys. So
right. So you were telling me your area that you cover primarily is the Eastern Corn Belt.
Yeah. So I kind of span a territory that's east of the Mississippi River and north of Tennessee. So it's a big area. Obviously a lot of time spending corn and soybeans in that area, but yeah, it's a great territory to have.
Just a few acres of crops in that area. So that's a good sized territory. So definitely, like I said, appreciate you being here. When we talk about seed treatments, like what needs to be on our customers and growers' minds right now when we're talking about these things?
Yeah, I think, we never quite know how the spring's going to go. We always kind of hope that we're going to be able to get the crop in early, being both corn and soybean. And so, that's kind of what we hope for every year. And I think a lot of us are experiencing this year, Mother Nature doesn't always play by those rules. And so I think we're really being thrown a curveball here with some of the late planting. I assume that's the case out in your area as well.
Yeah. I think both of us are seeing a little bit of it, Nick. I mean, we've had a really good week, at least the past week here for me, but there's still quite a bit of crops to go in, and everything, it feels delayed, even though we're getting a lot done.
Yeah, I concur. Jared is exactly about what I was going to say. A good week last week. However, there's a lot of work to be done yet. So we're kind of going from that and then just hoping that we can get the continued progress.
Yeah, no, it's great. I know we always try to hope to plant early, and of course, when we plant early, we seed treatments are top of mind, right? So it's typically cooler and wetter soils when we plant early. So we know that those seed treatments are very important. But I think it's important to kind of recognize that those aren't the only conditions where we can have diseases out in the field or insects out in the field. And one of the great examples of that, I think, is Olivo and sudden death and nematodes. And so I assume this is, pathogens you guys have, diseases in your area as well. So it'd probably be top of mind to talk about, huh?
Absolutely. And I guess one of the things, Nick, just to kind of give you my thoughts here, the later we get, especially Missouri, Southern Illinois, it gets really tempting to pull that seed treatment off, right? We go, okay, these beans are going to pop right out of the ground, and maybe people don't want to spend those extra dollars early, especially now that we've got different people that are treating like as it comes through the retail location, right? And I guess, can you emphasize a little bit or give us your thoughts on why it is important to keep those on there, whether it's Olivo or anything overall?
Yeah. I mean, anything overall. I mean, let's just talk about some of the other treatments that are on there before we get too much into Olivo. But you think about, warm conditions, plants, kind of grow quickly, right? You know what else is developing quickly when it's warm out? Insects, right? So they're cold blooded. And so they're going to be developing, fast. And what we don't want is a situation where we've got small plants without an insecticide and very active insects out there like bean leaf beetles and others. And so we don't want to run into that. And from the disease side, there are certain pathogens out there like Rhizoctonia that can thrive when it's, wet and warm out. And so it's not just cold temperatures that really set the stage for all diseases. They all kind of work a little differently. And so it's great to have those treatments on there, even as we're planting into through May and even into early June. But really probably the one I think to talk about the most is this idea of Alivo, right? So, prior to Alivo, really changing the game in SDS management, what did guys used to do to help combat SDS, right? They would plant late. That was an option. Exactly. It's hard to believe, right? Well, I assume that in your areas, guys are planting earlier and earlier as well to try and capture yield potential. That's probably the case. So,
yeah, and now that we're in a different situation, I think you're spot on. That's probably been the number one question I've gotten as far as seed treatments go. I know most of those flood over to your camp, but I get a few, and I think Brady does too. And is there still value in Alivo this late because the SDS in a lot of growers' minds may be diminishing in what they think is important, right?
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. So it is true that if you get later into the season, SDS does become a little bit, weaker of a problem, but that's not until mid-June, right? And that's a long way away. And so we typically see about a 4 bushel benefit from Alivo on average. Just looking at all the trials, that's kind of what we see going against SDS. And we see that through early June. And so we know that pathogen is still out there, still able to infect those soybean roots and still able to cause above and below ground symptoms later on. And oh, by the way, there's something else that Alivo protect against, right? That's nematodes. And so nematodes don't just pack it in as soon as May 10th comes around. They're going to be out there. And just like insects, they're going to start to speed up their hatch in May and June. And so really no escaping nematode threats. And again, Alivo is providing that protection, not just against SDS, but also nematodes like SCN as well.
And I think that makes us unique, right, Nick? I mean, one of the things I've heard you say 100 times in our meetings is, regardless of conditions, regardless of which one of those two pests you might run across, because honestly, down here where we've got some continuous soybeans or maybe a heavier soybean population, nematodes are one we don't even probably hit on enough for airwaves and talking about. The consistency that we have in the Alivo treatment and the confidence that we have, I guess, to me, it blows me away every time I go back and look at these data sets because we really are providing a consistent product that people shouldn't be backing away from even right now.
That's absolutely true. I know you're sitting in a spot where you get into Missouri, and that's really almost the number one state for SCN problems. Continuous soybean, you're really building up populations. And so it makes a lot of sense for growers in these areas to be using Alivo from that nematode management standpoint. Of course, it's bigger than that, right? You're going to want to use resistant varieties and all the other things that go into managing this pest. But, why leave an extra 2 to 4 bushels on the table, especially with these commodity prices, touching $16 a bushel? I mean, it's definitely something that growers need to be thinking about, staying strong with that decision even into those early June planting dates and really taking that to the bank at the end of the year. And so it's important to think about, definitely.
Yeah, I think, Nick, with this, and as we kind of wrap things up, it's really interesting to think about this. And when you get late, the guy wants to, hey, I'm just planting beans. He's in a hurry, right, already. And he's wanting to think about, I'm just planting beans. Give me some beans to go plant or whatever. Or he's got a replant situation. Doesn't stop to think about, hey, what are the other potential impacts I could have out there? He's just thinking about, I need a bag of beans to throw in the planter and get this stuff done. I've been way at this too long, and a lot of peer pressure, if you will, that comes on planting early and everything else like that, and everybody trying to keep up with the Joneses. So I think there's some valid points here about, hey, be aware of what's still out there, and there's still value and in what we're talking about for seed treatments and the Alivo treatments for later planted, and it's not all just early cold wet type stuff that we need to protect from those type of things in our soybean crop.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I couldn't have said it better myself. There are a lot of moving parts, and as soon as we start stripping away those treatments, we're really going to find out, why we use those in the first place. And so these are all excellent things to keep in mind as we march into this growing season, which seems like it's taken forever to do, but we're getting there. So.
Hey, Nick, one more thing here. I know we're running up on time, and I hope we get you back on here pretty soon, because one thing that I do want to state here to kind of close our call is BASF has got a huge seed treatment portfolio. We're really only hitting a little bit on Levo and some of that today, but when we acquired all of those pieces from the Bayer merger way back a couple of years ago, or I guess I should say way back, but the BASF name and seed treatments are still trying to get married together, and I think it's really key that we highlight. Levo is a big brand, but we've got a ton of solutions that you deal with, and I can talk Obvious Plus or Relania. I'd love to get you back on and talk about some of that stuff here in the future. So we really appreciate you getting on here and giving a little bit of insight. And again, I wish we could talk for 25 minutes, but we're a little limited on our time today.
I tell you what, I'll come back anytime you want to talk seed treatments. And you're right, BASF is the number one company for seed treatments following that acquisition. And so really proud to work for BASF and really proud to be the leader in seed treatment space, help these growers get off to a good start and start thinking about other things that they need to worry about, not just getting that seed out of the ground. So thank you, sir, very much for having me on.
Fantastic stuff, Nick. Again, Nick Tinsley, seed treatment field tech rep for BASF with us today. Really appreciate his time. Guys, we want to keep you subscribing, keep you watching our episodes, so be sure to like and subscribe down below on YouTube, or like if you're listening just to the podcast portion of this. So we appreciate you. We'll talk to you next week.